Welcome to The Rubber Meets the Road Economics, the podcast where we explore the driving forces behind today's economy and their real-world implications. Join investor Hunter Craig as he interviews Professor Edwin Burton from the University of Virginia, delving into the complexities of economics with clarity and insight. Whether you're an economics enthusiast or just curious about how economic policies affect your daily life, you're in the right place. Let's get started.
Welcome to Rubber Meets the Road Economics. Professor, you've been on summer break from teaching at the University of Virginia. Welcome.
It's good to see you, Hunter. Happy to do another podcast.
Professor, these are crazy times. The yield on the 2-month is 4.47 U.S. 2-month Treasury. The yield on the 10-year U.S. Treasury is 4.24%. The S&P 500 set a market record today, record high. What's going on in the economy?
Well, the first quarter numbers are finalized. The economy actually lost ground in the first quarter, down 0.5% for the quarter. Those numbers were released a couple of days ago. Inflation's been steadily coming down really over the last 12 months. I think the inflation is last year's news. I think that war is kind of over for the moment, unless the Fed decides to do something with its balance sheet. I think the problems in the future have more to do with the national debt levels and the tariff war that has broken out since the Trump administration came in. And I think those are the issues of the future, but I think inflation's in the past. I don't think we'll see it rear its head. I think even if oil prices take a jump, if something goes bad in the current truce between Israel and Iran, and oil prices spike, let's say, because of the Straits of Hormuz being closed, I still think that'll lead to a 1 or 2 month uptick in the CPI and all that. But I don't think it'll affect the long-run path of inflation. I think that's coming down. The only thing that can really affect the long-run path of inflation is an overactive Federal Reserve doing something equivalent to quantitative easing. There's no evidence they're doing that yet, although you pointed to the 2-month Treasury bill. Now, that's an interesting security because that trades real close to 4.5. And the Fed's current target range for the repo market or the federal funds market, whichever one you want to look at, is 4.25 to 0.5. So the pressure is on from the Trump administration to lower that to 4 to 1/4. But if the 2-month is sitting at 4.5, that's an obvious arbitrage, and it works in all circumstances unless the Fed were to lower the target and then turn around and raise it right back in the next 2 months, which they wouldn't do. They've never done anything like that. So that 2-month, keep your eye on the 2-month. If you want to know what the Fed's going to do, keep your eye on the 2-month Treasury. That's going to have to come down below 4.25, and it's a long way from that right now, 22 basis points from that, before the Fed can move. I think Powell's in an awkward position because the Trump administration keeps talking about how he can lower the funds rate 2 or 3%. That's not going to happen. Not without buying a massive amount of U.S. Treasuries and using the Fed balance sheet to do that. But that's still the pressure's there because there are Trump appointees sitting on the board. And Trump is about to choose a new Fed chairman down the road. And it's probably going to be, if I had to pick one name, it's probably going to be Kevin Warsh, most likely. Based on how Trump has picked people in the past, I think Warsh is the most likely candidate to get his nod. There's even word that he might put his name forward earlier, Kevin Warsh. Warsh is a good economist, but who knows? Under pressure from Trump, he might do some silly things. I hope not. So I don't see any Fed activity coming over the next few months. That's not what the market thinks. The market thinks there's going to be a drop in the target range for the funds rate. The market thinks that's going to be dropped in July. That's what the expectations currently are in the market. I don't see that. Not unless watch the 2-month. That'll tell you the whole story. If you see the 2-month in 3 weeks pushing toward 4.25, then you'll see a Fed rate cut probably. But there's no indication that'll happen. So what'll happen? The economy will continue to weaken. It's weakening now. You can see it in consumer spending. You can see it in the housing sector. You can see it in the auto sector. Everywhere you look, other than artificial intelligence and some of the mega techs, there is weakness literally everywhere. It's not terrible weakness. It's not clear that we'll have a recession. But I think the odds are increasingly favoring a recession starting in the second half of this year. Much lower inflation during the second half of this year. And who knows, the stock market, remember the biggest stocks are a little bit recession prone. There are people dealing with artificial intelligence and people watching Netflix on TV and stuff like that. And those are the big stocks. Those are the trillion-dollar stocks, the Microsofts, the Metas, et cetera, the NVIDIAs. Those things are getting bigger and bigger. So it's hard to say which way the averages will go. So at the stock market, I would have predicted, here's how good my predictions are, Hunter. If we sat here a year ago, I would have predicted the market would be 25% lower than it is. That would be my prediction. So those of you listening to my predictions, take that into account. I kind of missed that one for sure. I'm a little bit better on how the economy might do and inflation and interest rates and all that. But the stock market's hard to go because you've got a bifurcated economy. You've got the technology sector, which is booming and really going great guns because of lots of things. The artificial intelligence helps, but it's not just that. It's the Tesla's doing well, really. I mean, they've stumbled a little bit since Musk got political, but they're back on track, or seem to be. So their sector's still doing well, but I think weakness is ahead of us.
Professor, what's your prediction for the U.S. stock market and U.S. rates second half of 2025? Today is June 27th. So what's your prediction for the second half of this year?
Well, you've got two forces pushing in different directions. The scary force is the national debt. There's going to be an additional $1 trillion of government securities added to the auctions that we had last year, for example. And that's the deficit. That has to be financed. That also includes some of the so-called Treasury, Social Security trust funds. Some of that debt is also in those offerings. That's going to be hard to absorb. Your biggest buyers aren't there anymore. Japan and China, they buy a little, but they're always a threat to completely pull out, and they may even be net sellers. And Europe as well. Remember, 30% of all the auctions sales go to foreigners historically, and that's getting more difficult to do. Trump hasn't made a habit of being real friendly to a lot of people who buy our debt. And what finances that is the balance of payments deficit. If you really wage war on the balance of payments deficit, you'll lose the buyers of the Treasury. That's where they get the money to do it. That's where Japan and China get the money, for example, to do it. Japan currently has $1.1 trillion in U.S. Treasuries. China has less, has about $800 billion, roughly, somewhere in that area. And if they decided each to add $100 billion to the Treasury auctions, that would be disastrous. The world of economics happens at the margin. It's not the absolute or the average that matters. It's that extra $100 billion that shows up in the auctions. That can be trouble. Treasury bill auctions run about $40 or $50 billion per auction. They're auctioned every single Monday, the 3 and the 6 month. The other things are auctioned about weekly or every 2 weeks. So we get an up-to-date all the time. Every single week, almost every single day, we get an update on Treasury financing, and it's not good. Treasury financing is getting more perilous, and you're hearing that from a lot of bankers. People like Jamie Dimon are noticing that. And Dimon is no fool. He's right on top of the markets, more so than many economists are. So that's pushing rates. That's going to hold rates up, the fact that the debt is hard to finance. But going in the other direction, I think, is economic weakness. Economic weakness will lower lending demand, and if that happens, then there's an offset to that. But what it means generally is if we do fall into a recession, rates will be a lot higher than we're used to. People who are thinking we're going to get back to 1% rates and 3% mortgages, that's not going to happen. If you get help on the rate area, maybe you get some of these rates, you might get mortgage rates to take a look at 5.5%. That's probably the secular low, and over the next 2 or 3 years, if you have a recession, you're not going to see 3%. That's not going to happen. The 3% was unusual. Those of us who lived long enough can remember 18% mortgage in 1979, and people willingly took them out. They thought 12% was cheap, actually, by 81 and 82 in that area. So the big surprise will be if we do get a recession, rates aren't going to come in as much as people think. And the Fed will be under enormous pressure to help that. Now, here's the danger of that. If the Fed comes in to help, they might use their balance sheet to help. And balance sheet activity by the Federal Reserve is the main cause of inflation. You can take that one to the bank. It's not caused by all the other reasons people cite, trouble in the labor market or any of that sort of stuff. It's caused by the Federal Reserve printing money in excess. That's what caused the inflation we've seen since 2020. We increased the money supply 50% in 16 months while other commodities weren't going up in supply at all. That lowers the value of money. That's called inflation. So watch the Fed if you want to watch the course of inflation. But for now, the Fed's been quiet. Money supply has been growing pretty slowly. Inflation is not the problem looking out unless the Fed gets more active. I think inflation is effectively dead. You may see 2%, you may see 3%, you may see 1%, but you're not going to see 6% or 7%. And even if you have an oil spike, you're not going to see it. You might see it for a month or two, but that's it. It'll wash right out. So inflation's subdued. The economy's probably going to be weak. The big surprise will be that rates will be stubbornly higher than anybody's used to expecting in a recession.
Professor, there's a structural conflict between AI and the resulting efficiencies from AI versus the driving of higher interest rates as a result of 36 plus trillion in U.S. debt. Can you speak to that, please?
AI is interesting. Economists should spend a lot of time studying AI. It's very interesting because it has many different facets. Let me just cite a couple of them. One is if you're one of the builders of large language models, if you're Anthropic or ChatGPT, OpenAI, for example, if you're one of those building those things, you have very high fixed costs and almost zero marginal costs. Once you've built the large language model, your costs kind of go away. You just build a website that lets people use it. That kind of a business ultimately competes the prices right down to zero. So they're not likely to make any money. It's the same problem you saw in the fiber optics world, where you spend a lot of money building fiber optic systems all over the place, but the marginal cost was zero, and it forced the prices down to zero. And so fiber optics are great. We love them. We love the fact that when we're on fiber, internet is really going fast. But the people that built these things went broke, and I think that's going to be a problem for OpenAI and for the others. I'll tell you where the real money's to be made is people who construct agents for people. If you're a consultant and a hospital wants you to develop agent AIs for different purposes, you can make some money doing that. So I would recommend, I've recommended many times that at the University of Virginia, where I've been a professor for the last 38 years, I think they should require all freshmen to take a 1-year course on artificial intelligence. There is nothing in artificial intelligence or even large language models that is mathematically sophisticated. Most of the techniques used in developing large language models are essentially glorified curve fitting, data fitting techniques that have been known for hundreds of years. So there's nothing new there. What's new is we have this massive amount of data and we have the computing power to access it. And I think what happened was researchers just kind of stumbled on the fact that if you try to build a model that predicts the next word in a sentence, turns out you can interact with that model and that model can search things and produce things for you. And that's what artificial intelligence is doing. So I think that what I would encourage students to do is learn as much as they can about artificial intelligence and use it as often as they can. And if I were universities, I wouldn't prohibit kids from using artificial intelligence to write papers. I would do like I did last year in a course I had a term paper. And I said, first get AI to write it. And after you get AI to write it, then look at what AI wrote, then write your own version of it, and then tell me what differences you made from what AI did. In other words, learn how to use it. It's a shovel, but it's not a perfect shovel. It's a shovel that makes mistakes, it leaves things, has holes in the shovel. It hallucinates is the word in the industry that they say about artificial intelligence. But it would be foolish not to take advantage of what's there. This is a massive ability to essentially look into data and find things out. But there are a lot of things that are just mundane and rote in our lives that just are kind of automatic and repeat forms and all that. AI is great at that. You want to know something that everybody's known about, but you don't exactly know how to find out about it. Artificial intelligence is great. And someday everybody will have their own AI agent. You'll get up in the morning and you'll talk to your AI agent. It'll say, oh, hello, Hunter. How are you this morning? And you'll have a little conversation. It'll tell you what you're doing that day. That's great. That's good. That's what technology is all about. It's a good thing, not a bad thing. People are scared about jobs going away. No, this opens up new opportunities for people that are creative to do new and different things. It's a good thing. So that's kind of my view on AI. You don't want to be the guy selling the large. You don't want to be Sam Altman. Well, you do want to be Sam Altman. He's worth hundreds of billions, but you kind of don't want to be a shareholder in Sam Altman because they're big fixed cost and low marginal cost. Unless they find some other acts to deploy, it's not going to work. The people that'll make it are people who take the large language models and create agents for other people. In other words, applications of artificial intelligence. But that's tricky, because somebody has to notice that it does make errors. For example, in investment banking, You can use it now in investment banking and replace a lot of analysts. But you better have some analysts that understand it and know when it makes mistakes. So you have to have better analysts than used to. You just have fewer of them. And that, I think, is going to be the picture in a lot of industries. But I think it's a good thing. I think it's an unalloyed good thing. I think it'll lead to good things for everybody.
Professor, the Federal Reserve meets in July to set the federal funds target rate. The federal funds target rate today, 4.25% to 4.5%. Yield on the 2-month is 4.458. You've mentioned that the Fed may be able to lower interest rates if the yield gets to 4.25%. Can you speak to what would happen if the Federal Reserve set the federal funds target rate to 4%? What would be the resulting arbitrage, and how does that work?
It's pretty easy. You just buy the 2-month at 4.5 or 4.4, whatever number. And then if they have the financing rate at 4.25, fine. You just finance it for 1 day at 4.25. Now you might say, well, that you can do that for 1 day, but what about the next day? If they reverse their policy the next day, then you might lose. But they're not going to reverse their policy next day, so you can be pretty sure 4.25 is the top financing rate for the next 2 months. So if you're sitting there at Morgan Stanley, what you do is you buy $5 billion of it. You finance in the repo market. You put up essentially nothing to do that trade, and then you make the difference. And what's the difference? The difference is 25 basis points, 0.25% multiplied times $5 billion times 2 over 12, 2 months out of 12 months.
Professor, is the repo rate the same as the Fed funds rate?
The repo rate is essentially the SOFR, which is the secured overnight funding rate. Purists would say, no, those are different, but realists would say, yes, they're identical. There's really no difference. It's the rate at which, if I loan you money and you give me Treasury's collateral, that's the rate overnight. And it really doesn't matter who you are. If you give me, say, $110 million worth of Treasury bills, then I'll loan you $100 million. That's a very safe loan. It's the safest loan you can make. It's sometimes known as the risk-free rate in academic analysis. And it essentially is the same as the funds rate. Now, the funds rate's different. It's not a collateralized loan. The funds rate is the loan at which maybe Citibank loans reserves to JP Morgan or something like that. There's no collateral. They just enter an accounting entry. So it really should be riskier than, say, a repo. But as a practical matter, the government guarantees all the banks anyway. So it has essentially the same credit risk. So they're the same instrument. They're a 1-day loan of cash secured by the U.S. government obligation.
Professor, thank you. We'll all be watching next month when the Federal Reserve meets in July and see if you pass your exam on your prediction. But we're all keenly interested in what the Fed's going to do.
Keep your eye on the 2-month. That'll tell you the answer.
Professor, next podcast, we need to talk about high-speed trading, and is that good for the U.S. markets? But that's next podcast. Thank you, Professor. Well done. Thank you.
Thank you, Hunter.
Thank you for joining us for the Rubber Meets the Road Economics podcast. If you enjoyed the discussion, remember to subscribe and stay updated with future episodes. Join us soon for more conversations about modern economics on the Rubber Meets the Road Economics podcast.